The ocean is vast, mysterious, and often deceptive in its calm. Just beneath the waves, sharks glide with a silent confidence, honed by millions of years of evolution. They're not monsters, they're survivors, responding to the slightest shift in water or scent. But sometimes a simple splash or mistaken movement is all it takes to trigger a deadly encounter. Out here, you're not at the top of the food chain. You're a visitor in a predator's domain. From surprise strikes in ankle-deep water to horrifying encounters miles offshore. In this video, we'll uncover 6 terrifying shark attacks where ordinary adventures turned into life-or-death struggles. The jagged coastline of Norway's northernmost regions had long been a sanctuary for marine life researchers. The deep, frigid waters of the fjords provided an ideal habitat for numerous species, including the majestic orca whales that migrated through these passages each winter. For generations, these waters had sustained local fishing communities, while simultaneously attracting scientists from across the globe, all eager to study the unique ecosystem that thrived in this harsh Arctic environment. On November 12, Dr. Lena Blake, a 38-year-old marine biologist from the University of British Columbia, had dedicated the past 15 years of her career to studying orca communication patterns. Her groundbreaking research on pod dialects had earned her international recognition, and this particular expedition to Norway's fjords represented the culmination of her life's work. She aimed to document the unique vocalizations of the Norwegian orca population, comparing them with the patterns she had previously observed in North American waters. Alongside Lena were her 2 trusted colleagues, Dr. Marta Knutsen from the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research and graduate student Pavel Dobrinin. The 3 researchers had ventured out on that fateful morning in a small 5-meter inflatable research vessel, equipped with hydrophones and recording equipment. Weather conditions had been deemed acceptable despite the overcast sky and light chop on the water's surface. The forecast predicted stable conditions, and the team had planned a 6-hour excursion to track a pod of 7 orcas that had been spotted near the mouth of Kaldfjord. 3 hours into their expedition, the researchers had collected promising audio samples and were preparing to deploy their underwater camera system when Lena noticed something unusual. A large male orca, estimated to be nearly 7 meters in length, had separated from the main pod and begun approaching their boat. This behavior, while uncommon, wasn't unprecedented. Curious orcas occasionally investigated vessels in the area. Lena signaled to her colleagues to maintain their positions and continue recording, recognizing the rare research opportunity unfolding before them. What happened next occurred with such shocking speed that Pavel later reported feeling as though time itself had warped. The male orca suddenly accelerated toward their vessel, diving momentarily before surging upward with tremendous force. The impact struck directly beneath where Lena was standing, launching the small boat nearly vertically before capsizing it completely. All 3 researchers were violently thrown into the water, their thick neoprene dry suits providing only minimal protection against the 4°C water. Marta later recounted the chaos that ensued as they struggled to orient themselves in the churning water. The capsized boat drifted rapidly away, carried by the current and wind. Through the splashing and confusion, she caught sight of Lena approximately 10 meters away, treading water and attempting to signal toward the shoreline where their support team waited, unaware of the unfolding disaster. The male orca circled once, creating a visible wake that caused Pavel to shout a warning. Before Lena could react, the massive predator surged forward, its enormous jaws emerging from the water and closing around her torso. According to both witnesses, Lena's expression showed not fear but rather a profound shock, an almost academic surprise, in that brief moment before she was pulled beneath the surface. What followed haunted the survivors for years afterward. The water around them frothed violently as the orca thrashed below the surface. Red blooms rose through the churning foam while Marta and Pavel screamed for help, desperately trying to swim toward the distant shore, while simultaneously watching in horror as their colleague was subjected to an attack unprecedented in modern scientific records. The support team on shore, alerted by the commotion, launched a rescue boat immediately. By the time they reached Mart and Pavel, approximately 18 minutes after the initial capsizing, there was no sign of either Lena or the orca. Despite an extensive search involving the Norwegian Coast Guard, police, and volunteer vessels, Lena Blake's body was never recovered. The incident sent shockwaves through the marine biology community. Orcas, despite their killer whale moniker, had no documented history of fatal attacks on humans in the wild. Theories emerged attempting to explain the anomalous behavior, ranging from territorial defense to mistaken identity, but no consensus was ever reached. The Norwegian Maritime Authority's subsequent investigation concluded that while proper safety protocols had been followed, the incident highlighted the inherent risks of working in close proximity to large marine predators. New guidelines were established requiring additional safety vessels to accompany research boats during similar expeditions. For Pavel Dobrinin, who abandoned his doctoral studies following the incident, the memory of watching his mentor disappear beneath the waves remained an indelible trauma. Marta Knudsen returned to research after a year's sabbatical, dedicating her subsequent work to Lena's memory and completing the analysis of the communication data they had collected before the attack. Lena Blake's legacy lived on through her published research and through the Lena Blake Foundation for Marine Safety, established by her parents to improve emergency response protocols for researchers working in remote marine environments. The tragic incident, while extraordinarily rare, served as a sobering reminder of nature's unpredictability and the risks faced by those who dedicate their lives to understanding the ocean's most powerful inhabitants. Known as Shark Alley, the waters between Dyer Island and Geyser Rock had earned a fearsome reputation as one of the densest populations of great white sharks in the world. The convergence of deep ocean currents and abundant seal colonies had created a natural hunting ground that drew both predators and thrill-seekers alike. Since the late 1990s, the local economy has transformed from traditional fishing to shark cage diving tourism, with dozens of operators offering visitors the chance to witness these apex predators up close. David Markham, a 35-year-old investment banker from Leeds, England, had harbored a lifelong fascination with sharks. What had begun as a childhood obsession with marine documentaries had evolved into an annual ritual of seeking out shark encounters around the globe. Over the past decade, he had logged more than 50 cage dives across Australia, Mexico, and the Bahamas. South Africa represented the culmination of his shark-seeking journey, the ultimate destination for anyone serious about witnessing great whites in their element. The morning of September 18th had begun with perfect conditions. Light offshore winds had created glassy surface conditions, and visibility extended nearly 15 meters below the surface. The crew of the Apex Predator, a 20-meter converted fishing vessel specializing in shark expeditions, had been optimistic about the day's prospects. Captain Willem Bardman, a veteran with nearly 2 decades of experience in these waters, had noted increased shark activity over the previous week, suggesting they might encounter multiple specimens during their 6-hour excursion. 3 hours into the trip, after anchoring at a site approximately 8 kilometers offshore, the crew began their routine of creating a chum slick, a mixture of fish blood, oil, and ground sardines designed to attract sharks from a distance. David, along with 4 other tourists, had listened attentively to the safety briefing while donning the provided wetsuits. As an experienced diver, he had positioned himself to be first into the reinforced steel cage that hung partially submerged off the boat's starboard side. The first shark had appeared within 40 minutes, a 3-meter female that cruised nonchalantly past the cage before disappearing into the blue. The second encounter, occurring roughly 30 minutes later, involved 2 smaller males that showed minimal interest in either the bait or the human observers. By early afternoon, the group had rotated through the cage twice, with David eagerly awaiting his third opportunity to enter the water. According to the crew's report filed afterward with the Maritime Safety Authority, the incident occurred at approximately 2:37 p.m. when a massive female great white, estimated at nearly 6 meters in length, emerged suddenly from below. The shark, later identified by researchers as a known specimen nicknamed Colossus due to its exceptional size, approached the cage with uncharacteristic aggression. Rather than the typical investigative pass, it charged directly toward the steel structure, striking it with such force that several of the upper support bars bent inward. David, who had been positioned at the forward section of the cage, received the brunt of the impact. The violent collision had thrown him against the rear bars, momentarily knocking him unconscious. As water rushed into the now compromised structure, the shark circled back and bit down on the twisted metal, inadvertently catching David's arm and torso in its massive jaws. The pressure partially extracted him through the damaged section of bars. Deckhand Peter Van Wyck later described how the water around the cage instantly turned crimson as the shark thrashed, its serrated teeth slicing through David's wetsuit and into his ribcage. Captain Bardman had immediately slammed the vessel's engines into reverse, creating enough disturbance to momentarily disorient the shark. In that crucial moment, Peter and another crew member had leaned precariously over the side, grabbing David's uninjured arm and hauling him back toward the vessel as the shark released its grip. The emergency extraction took less than 40 seconds, but David had suffered catastrophic injuries. His right arm had been severely lacerated, with extensive damage to the deltoid muscle and humerus. More seriously, 4 of his ribs had been cracked, with one puncturing his right lung. Despite the trauma, he had remained conscious as the crew administered emergency first aid and radioed for immediate helicopter evacuation. When the medical helicopter arrived 23 minutes later, David had been stabilized but remained in critical condition. The flight to Cape Town's hospital had taken 37 minutes, during which time he had required 2 emergency blood transfusions. Surgeons spent nearly 7 hours repairing the damage to his thoracic cavity and reconstructing his shoulder. Remarkably, David survived the ordeal. After 3 weeks in intensive care and 4 subsequent surgeries, he had regained limited mobility in his right arm. The physical scars, a network of jagged lines extending from his shoulder to his hip, were matched by the psychological trauma that manifested as severe aquaphobia and recurring nightmares. The incident sparked intense debate within South Africa's tourism industry regarding cage diving safety standards. Investigations revealed that the cage had met all regulatory requirements, but the exceptional size and unusual behavior of the shark had created circumstances that no safety protocol could have adequately addressed. New regulations mandating thicker steel bars and additional support structures were implemented 6 months later. David Markham never returned to the water. In interviews given after his recovery, he expressed no animosity toward the shark or the dive operators, but acknowledged that his shark diving days had reached a definitive end. He later channeled his experiences into a marine conservation foundation, focused on protecting South Africa's shark populations from illegal fishing, finding purpose in preserving the very creatures that had nearly claimed his life. The pristine shores of Tofo, with their powdery white sand and crystal clear waters, had long been considered one of Africa's hidden coastal gems. Located on Mozambique's southeastern coast in Inhambane province, this once sleepy fishing village had gradually transformed into an exclusive honeymoon destination over the previous decade. Tourism had flourished following the country's recovery from decades of civil unrest, with luxury eco-resorts dotting the coastline and attracting visitors seeking an authentic yet comfortable African beach experience away from the crowds of more popular destinations. Marina and Viktor Orlov, newlyweds from St. Petersburg, Russia, had selected Tofo specifically for its reputation as a world-class diving location. Both avid underwater enthusiasts, they had met 3 years earlier during a diving certification course and had subsequently planned their nuptials around this dream honeymoon. Their wedding, a lavish affair in Marina's hometown of Kazan, had been followed by the 12-day Mozambican getaway, which represented the culmination of months of meticulous planning. The first 10 days of their stay had been nothing short of idyllic. The couple had completed 6 dives, spotting whale sharks, manta rays, and an array of colorful reef fish. Their oceanfront bungalow at the Sunset Resort provided spectacular views of the Indian Ocean, with direct access to a secluded stretch of beach frequented only by local fishermen in the early morning hours. On their final evening in Tofo, January 28th, Marina and Victor had planned a special sunset swim before their farewell dinner at the resort's renowned seafood restaurant. The couple had spent the afternoon packing for their return journey when Marina suggested they take advantage of the exceptionally calm conditions for one last dip in the ocean. According to Victor's subsequent statement to authorities, they had noticed the beach was deserted but had attributed this to the dinner hour rather than any potential danger. At approximately 6:45 p.m., with the sun hanging low on the horizon, Marina had waded into the warm shallows while Victor applied sunscreen on the shore. The water was exceptionally clear, with visibility extending several meters in every direction. Marina, wearing a vibrant turquoise swimsuit, had ventured to waist-deep water about 15 meters from shore when the attack occurred. Witnesses from a nearby resort described hearing a sudden piercing scream that echoed across the otherwise quiet beach. Victor, looking up from the shore, had seen Marina lurch violently backward as though struck by an invisible force. The water around her instantly churned into a frothy pink cloud as a large bull shark, later estimated to be approximately 3 meters in length, clamped its powerful jaws around her upper thigh. Without hesitation, Victor had sprinted into the water toward his struggling wife. Marina later recalled that the initial bite had felt more like a powerful punch than a cutting sensation. The shark's 300-pound pressure instantly shredding through skin, muscle, and sinew. As the predator began its characteristic bite-and-shake motion, Victor had reached the churning water and, in an act of remarkable courage, had plunged both hands into the bloody foam. Following instincts recalled from a long-ago diving safety course, he had managed to locate the shark's eye and had driven his thumbs deep into the sensitive organ. The bull shark, momentarily disoriented by this unexpected counterattack, had released its grip on Marina's leg and veered away into deeper water, leaving a trail of disturbed sand and dissipating blood. Victor had immediately dragged his severely injured wife toward the shore, struggling against the incoming tide and her rapidly weakening state. Once on the beach, he had utilized his leather belt as a makeshift tourniquet, cinching it tightly around Marina's upper thigh to stem the catastrophic bleeding. A nearby fisherman, hearing the commotion, had rushed to assist and had used his mobile phone to alert emergency services. The resort's medical officer had arrived within minutes, administering emergency first aid while awaiting the ambulance dispatch from Inham Regional Hospital. Marina had remained conscious throughout the ordeal, though in a state of severe shock. The medical report would later indicate that the shark's bite had severed her femoral artery, and without Victor's immediate application of the tourniquet, she would have exsanguinated within minutes. The ambulance journey to the hospital had taken 47 agonizing minutes over poorly maintained roads. Upon arrival, Marina had been immediately taken into surgery, where doctors worked for over 5 hours to repair the extensive damage to her quadriceps muscle, femur, and vascular system. The attack had removed approximately 2 kilograms of tissue from her thigh, requiring multiple transfusions and eventually a series of skin grafts. Remarkably, Marina survived. After 2 weeks in Mozambique's medical system, she had been airlifted to a specialized trauma center in Johannesburg, South Africa, before eventually returning to Russia for extended rehabilitation. The recovery process had been arduous, involving 6 additional surgeries and 18 months of physical therapy. The extensive scarring and muscle damage meant she would walk with a permanent limp, her professional career as a ballet instructor permanently altered. Marine biologists investigating the incident noted that bull sharks were known to occasionally inhabit the coastal waters of Mozambique, particularly during the warmer months between November and February. Their ability to tolerate fresh water often led them into river mouths and estuaries, though attacks in the region remained exceedingly rare. Local authorities introduced a flag warning system and imposed swimming restrictions during dawn and dusk, which are the times when sharks are most likely to feed. Victor and Marina Orlov eventually established the Mozambique Beach Safety Initiative, working with local communities to improve emergency response protocols for remote coastal areas. In media interviews years later, Marina emphasized that she harbored no resentment toward the shark or the location where the attack occurred. Their experience, while traumatic, had strengthened their bond and redirected their shared passion for marine environments toward conservation and safety education. The rugged coastline of South Africa's Western Cape had long been revered as one of the world's premier destinations for observing great white sharks. The small fishing town of Gansbaai, situated approximately 170 kilometers east of Cape Town, had earned the ominous nickname Shark Alley due to the dense population of these apex predators in the channel between Dyer Island and Geyser Rock. The unique ecological conditions created by the convergence of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, combined with the presence of a 60,000-strong Cape fur seal colony, had established the perfect hunting grounds for great whites, some measuring up to 6 meters in length. For generations, local fishermen had respected the unspoken boundary between human recreation and these prehistoric hunters, restricting swimming activities to protected bays and shallow coves. Tourism centered around cage diving had flourished since the early 1990s, bringing much-needed economic activity to the region while simultaneously raising awareness about shark conservation. However, sporadic attacks along less frequented stretches of coastline served as grim reminders of nature's unpredictability. On August 14, 2008, the Van Zyl family had arrived in Gansbaai for what was intended to be a restorative weekend retreat from their hectic lives in Johannesburg. Peter Van Zyl, a 42-year-old mining executive, his wife Anneke, a pediatrician, and their two children, 9-year-old Michael and 11-year-old Elna, had rented a modest holiday cottage overlooking a secluded beach approximately 8 kilometers east of the main harbor. The location, unmarked on tourist maps and recommended by a colleague familiar with the area, promised the privacy and tranquility the family craved after months of urban stress. The morning of August 26th had dawned clear and unseasonably warm for late winter in the Cape. By 10:30 a.m., the Van Zyls had loaded their vehicle with picnic supplies and beach equipment, arriving at their secluded spot shortly before noon. According to Peter's subsequent police statement, they had noticed no warning signs regarding shark activity, nor had their rental agent mentioned any restrictions about water access. The beach, a pristine 800-meter crescent of sand bordered by dramatic dolomite cliffs, appeared completely deserted. After establishing their picnic site near the dunes, Peter and Anneke allowed Michael and Elna to wade into the shallows while they arranged the food and blankets. The water temperature, though cool at approximately 15 degrees Celsius, had not deterred the excited children, who had spent the previous weeks anticipating this coastal holiday. Witnesses from a hiking trail along the cliffs later reported seeing the children splashing happily in waist-deep water, roughly 20 meters from shore. At approximately 12:23 p.m., the tragedy began to unfold with terrifying swiftness. Anneke, while arranging sandwich ingredients, had glanced up to check on the children just as an enormous shadow moved beneath the surface behind them. Before she could vocalize a warning, the water erupted in explosive violence as a massive great white shark, later estimated at 4.8 meters in length, surged upward beneath Michael. The boy had no opportunity to react as the predator's jaws clamped around his torso, lifting him entirely from the water in a spray of crimson foam. Peter, responding to his wife's scream, had immediately sprinted toward the water's edge. In the chaotic seconds that followed, Elna had attempted to swim toward shore, her panicked splashing inadvertently triggering the shark's predatory instincts. Witnesses described the sickening moment when the great white released Michael's lifeless body, and with incredible speed, redirected toward Elna. The second attack had been equally devastating. The shark seized the girl around her midsection and dragged her beneath the surface in a violent swirl of disturbed sand and blood. The parents' desperate attempts to reach their children had been futile. By the time Peter entered the water, both Michael and Elna had disappeared beneath the surface. A German hiking couple, who had witnessed the attack from the cliffs above, had immediately contacted emergency services while descending to the beach to assist. The first responders, including members of the Gansbaai Shark Conservancy research team, arrived approximately 22 minutes after the initial attack. The recovery operation had extended into the evening hours. Michael's severely mauled body was located approximately 300 meters offshore by Coast Guard personnel at 4:48 p.m. Despite an extensive search involving boats, helicopters, and volunteer divers, Elna's remains were not recovered until the following morning, washed ashore nearly 2 kilometers from the attack site. Autopsy reports concluded that both children had died instantly from catastrophic trauma and blood loss. The incident represented the deadliest shark attack in South African waters since 1977. Marine biologists examining the evidence suggested the shark had likely been hunting seals along the coastline when it encountered the children. The splashing pattern typical of playful swimming closely mimicked the movement signatures of injured seal pups, a primary target for great whites in the region. The shark's decision to release the first victim and pursue a second, while unusual, aligned with known test bite behaviors when great whites encounter unfamiliar prey. The psychological impact on Peter and Anneke Van Zyl proved devastating. Following weeks of intense media scrutiny, they retreated from public life entirely. Friends reported that their marriage dissolved within 18 months of the tragedy, the shared trauma creating an unbridgeable emotional chasm. Peter eventually relocated to New Zealand, while Annika returned to her hometown of Stellenbosch, where she established a children's bereavement counseling center. The dual fatality prompted immediate action from local authorities. Comprehensive shark monitoring programs were implemented along the entire Western Cape coastline, with dedicated spotters positioned at elevated observation points during peak recreation hours. Warning signage in multiple languages was installed at even the most remote beach access points, and educational outreach programs were integrated into local school curricula. The location of the attack was permanently closed to public access, converted instead into a marine research station focused on great white behavior and conservation. The southern coast of Australia's Eyre Peninsula has earned its reputation as the Great White Triangle, through decades of shark encounters and a steadily growing ecotourism industry centered around these formidable predators. Port Lincoln, a prosperous fishing hub located at the southern tip of the peninsula, had transformed itself from a tuna fishing capital to a premier destination for adventure seekers, hoping to glimpse the ocean's most perfect predator. The waters of the Spencer Gulf, with their unique combination of deep channels, abundant seal colonies, and nutrient-rich currents, had created an ideal hunting ground for great white sharks, some measuring up to 7 meters in length. Adam Riley, a 40-year-old commercial pilot from Melbourne, had organized the fishing expedition as part of his annual leave. A lifelong angling enthusiast, he had convinced 3 colleagues, senior flight attendants from the same airline, to join him for a 4-day charter aboard the Southern Cross, a well-maintained 42-foot sport fishing vessel operated by local Captain Malcolm Jennings. Their target species included bluefin tuna and mako sharks, both known to inhabit the offshore waters during the Australian summer months. The morning of February 17th had begun with ideal conditions. Light southeasterly winds had created minimal surface chop, and the sky remained clear with unlimited visibility. By 8:30 a.m., Captain Jennings had navigated the Southern Cross approximately 28 kilometers offshore to a location locally known as the Shelf, where the continental shelf dropped dramatically from 80 meters to over 400 meters in depth. This underwater precipice created powerful upwellings that attracted pelagic predators from throughout the region. For nearly 4 hours, the group had enjoyed steady action, landing several yellowtail kingfish and a respectable bluefin tuna weighing approximately 43 kilograms. Adam had just settled into the fighting chair after taking a brief break for lunch, when the vessel's sonar unit emitted an unusual alert tone. Captain Jennings, glancing at the display, had noted an exceptionally large contact approaching from the vessel's port side at considerable speed. His initial assumption that they had located another school of tuna was immediately dispelled when he observed the object's dimensions and movement pattern. Before he could alert the passengers, the massive great white shark breached the surface less than 5 meters from the stern. According to First Mate Jesse Thompson's subsequent report, the shark, estimated at 5.5 meters in length, had launched itself partially out of the water before crashing back down with tremendous force. The impact sent a massive wave across the transom, drenching the deck and momentarily destabilizing the vessel. Adam, still secured in the fighting chair, had been violently thrown sideways as the boat lurched beneath him. The chair's mounting brackets, not designed to withstand such lateral force, had snapped free from the deck. Adam, entangled in the fishing harness, had tumbled over the gunwale and into the churning water. His fellow passengers later reported that he had not even had time to shout before disappearing beneath the surface alongside the broken chair. Captain Jennings had immediately cut the engines to prevent potential injury from the propellers, while First Mate Thompson deployed a life ring in Adam's approximate location. The water, initially clear, had quickly become turbid as the shark circled back toward the struggling man. Witnesses aboard the vessel described the horrifying moment when the great white's distinctive dorsal fin sliced through the surface, heading directly toward Adam with frightening purpose. The attack had occurred just below the surface, visible to all aboard as a violent eruption of white water followed by a rapidly expanding crimson cloud. Adam had reportedly fought back with remarkable presence of mind. repeatedly striking the shark's sensitive gill area and eyes. After what survivors described as an eternity, but was likely less than 20 seconds, he had broken free from the predator's grip and surfaced, gasping and bleeding profusely from deep lacerations across his left thigh and torso. The crew's response had been immediate and well coordinated. First Mate Thompson had secured a boat hook into Adam's wetsuit, while Captain Jennings and one passenger had formed a human chain to haul him back aboard. Once on deck, they had implemented emergency first aid protocols, applying pressure bandages to the most severe wounds and elevating his legs to combat shock. The vessel's emergency position indicating radio beacon, EPIRB, had been activated, and a distress call had been transmitted to the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. The journey back to Port Lincoln had taken 1 hour and 17 minutes, with Captain Jennings pushing the vessel's engines beyond recommended limits. A medical evacuation helicopter had intercepted them approximately 8 kilometers offshore, lowering a paramedic to stabilize Adam before winching him into the aircraft. He had remained conscious throughout the ordeal, though in severe shock from blood loss and trauma. In the hospital, emergency surgeons had worked for over 6 hours to repair extensive damage to Adam's quadriceps muscle, femoral artery, and abdominal wall. The shark's serrated teeth had sliced through multiple layers of tissue with surgical precision, requiring over 300 stitches to close. Remarkably, no major organs had been damaged, though the blood loss had necessitated multiple transfusions. Adam's recovery had progressed better than initial medical projections suggested. After 2 weeks in intensive care and another month in rehabilitation, he had regained limited mobility in his left leg. The psychological impact, however, had proven more challenging to overcome. Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, he had undergone extensive therapy to address recurring nightmares and severe thalassophobia, or an intense fear of deep water. Marine biologists investigating the incident had noted several unusual aspects of the encounter. The shark's aggressive breach toward the vessel represented atypical behavior, as great whites generally investigated boats cautiously before deciding whether they represented potential prey. Subsequent tissue analysis from Adam's wounds had revealed elevated testosterone levels in the shark, suggesting it might have been a sexually mature male in a heightened aggressive state due to the breeding season. The incident, while sensationalized in Australian media, had actually strengthened local support for shark conservation efforts. Adam himself had become an unexpected advocate, establishing the Riley Foundation for Responsible Marine Tourism, which promoted education about shark behavior and safety protocols for offshore activities. In interviews given during his recovery, he had repeatedly emphasized that he harbored no animosity toward the animal, acknowledging that he had entered its domain fully aware of the potential risks. Huntington Beach, with its consistent breaks and vibrant coastal culture, represented the beating heart of California's surfing scene. The 10-mile stretch of golden sand hosted numerous international competitions annually, while the extensive pier provided both a landmark and a gathering point for the local surf community. Despite occasional reports of shark sightings further north at Malibu and Santa Barbara, Huntington Beach had maintained a relatively pristine safety record regarding marine predator encounters. Jake Peterson, a 34-year-old software engineer with Quantum Technologies, had relocated to Huntington Beach from Seattle specifically for the surfing lifestyle. Having discovered the sport during a college trip to Hawaii, he had gradually progressed from a weekend enthusiast to a dedicated dawn patroller over the previous decade. That particular Monday morning, February 7th, Jake had risen before sunrise to squeeze in a brief session before reporting to his company's Newport Beach office for an important client presentation. The conditions that morning had been less than ideal. A moderate onshore wind had chopped the surface, while overcast skies cast a grayish pallor across the water. Most recreational surfers had opted to remain in bed, leaving the lineup unusually deserted. Jake had paddled out at approximately 6:15 a.m. at a spot locals called The Point, roughly 400 meters south of the main pier. According to his later statement, he had noticed the absence of other surfers, but had attributed this to the early hour and suboptimal conditions, rather than any potential danger. After 20 minutes of paddling against the persistent current, Jake had positioned himself approximately 75 meters offshore. The water temperature, a brisk 14 degrees Celsius, had necessitated his 4/3 millimeter wetsuit despite the relatively mild Southern California winter. As he straddled his board waiting for suitable waves, he had observed an unusual disturbance in the water approximately 10 meters to his right, a swift V-shaped wake cutting through the chop before disappearing beneath the surface. Marine biologists would later confirm that this wake pattern was consistent with the hunting behavior of a mako shark, specifically the short-fin mako. These pelagic predators rarely ventured into such shallow coastal waters, typically preferring the open ocean where they could utilize their remarkable speed of up to 45 miles per hour in pursuit of tuna and swordfish. However, changing ocean temperature patterns had increasingly driven their prey species closer to shore, with the predators following an adaptation. The attack had occurred with the explosive velocity characteristic of the species. Without warning, the water beneath Jake's dangling legs had erupted as the mako, later estimated at nearly 3 meters in length, launched vertically toward the surface. Its powerful jaws had clamped around Jake's left side, penetrating his wetsuit and sinking deeply into the flesh between his ribs and hip. The initial strike had generated such force that both surfer and predator had momentarily become airborne before crashing back into the churning water. Jake later recalled experiencing not pain, but rather an overwhelming pressure, as though caught in an industrial vice. The shark's momentum had pulled him from his board and beneath the surface in a disorienting tumble of bubbles and thrashing limbs. Operating on pure instinct, he had managed to rotate within the shark's grip, bringing his right leg up and forcefully planting his heel against the predator's snout. Simultaneously, he had driven stiffened fingers toward what he believed was the animal's gill area, a technique he had read about in a surf magazine years earlier. Whether through luck or effectiveness, the counterattack had prompted the mako to release its grip. Jake had immediately kicked hard toward the surface, breaking through into the air with a desperate gasp. The shore, suddenly seeming impossibly distant, had wavered in his vision as shock began to set in. His surfboard, still attached to his ankle by the leash, had floated nearby, and he had scrambled onto it with adrenaline-fueled strength, lying prone and paddling frantically toward land. Quincy Watkins, a local beach maintenance worker conducting his morning trash collection, had witnessed the final moments of the attack from shore. Seeing Jake's struggles, he had immediately contacted emergency services before rushing to the water's edge. As Jake approached the shallows, his strength rapidly failing, Quincy had waded out to assist, dragging both surfer and board the final meters to dry sand. The damage had been severe. The mako's serrated teeth had created 5 deep lacerations across Jake's left side, exposing ribs and severing multiple blood vessels. Quincy had utilized his maintenance radio to coordinate with lifeguards, who arrived within 4 minutes carrying a medical kit. They had applied pressure bandages and administered oxygen while waiting for paramedics to arrive. The ambulance journey to a hospital in Newport Beach had taken approximately 17 minutes. Upon arrival, Jake had been rushed directly into trauma surgery, where a team led by Dr. Eleanor Sandoval had worked for over 5 hours to repair the extensive damage. The shark's teeth had penetrated his abdominal cavity, lacerating his spleen and creating a pneumothorax in his left lung. Additionally, substantial muscle tissue had been removed from his external oblique and latissimus dorsi. Jake's recovery had progressed in stages. After 10 days in intensive care and another 2 weeks in the hospital's general ward, he had begun a rigorous 6-month rehabilitation program. The physical wounds had healed better than expected, leaving dramatic but functional scarring across his torso. The psychological impact, however, had proven more complicated. Initially diagnosed with acute post-traumatic stress disorder, Jake had struggled with vivid flashbacks and severe anxiety regarding water. Remarkably, through dedicated therapy and the support of the local surf community, Jake had eventually returned to the ocean. 18 months after the attack, he had participated in a ceremonial paddle-out organized by fellow surfers, though he remained restricted to beaches with active shark monitoring programs and never again surfed alone at dawn or dusk. The incident had prompted the city of Huntington Beach to implement enhanced marine safety protocols, including aerial patrols during peak recreation hours, and the installation of sonar-based shark detection systems at popular swimming beaches. Marine biologists from the University of California had conducted extensive research in the area, determining that changing ocean temperatures had indeed altered traditional mako migration patterns. bringing these typically offshore predators closer to recreational areas than previously documented. Jake Peterson had ultimately transformed his traumatic experience into public education, establishing the Ocean Awareness Project, a non-profit organization that provided shark safety information to coastal communities throughout Southern California. In media appearances, he consistently emphasized the rarity of such encounters and the importance of understanding rather than fearing these essential apex predators.